In today's tutorial, I'm going to show you how to sketch a 10-figure fashion illustration. Hi friends, welcome back to So Obvious. I'm a Poliner. For this week's video, I actually planned on doing something different, but work has been super busy. This last week we had a very big, very stressful event happen. If you've ever worked in a nursing home, you probably know exactly what I'm talking about. So that event caused all the department heads, including myself, to come into work really early and leave work really late for the majority of the week. So I've kind of been worn out. I didn't get a chance to go get more muslin fabric, which I needed. So I decided that instead for this week, I was going to show you guys how to do a fashion illustration. We are going to need a ruler, pencil, eraser, and of course some paper. Okay, so when it comes to illustration, specifically for fashion, people always call it a 10-head figure. What that means is that the overall length of the illustration from the top of their head to the bottom of their feet is 10 times the length of their head. Now, the reason why they call it a 10-head figure is because the average person is really only about 7 to 7.5 figure heads. But in fashion, they like to call their illustrations to be long, lean, and leggy. The majority of the extra added length in the fashion illustration, a lot of it is added from the hips down, so most of it is in their leg. Now, when it comes to actually sketching them out, there is some rules. They're not necessarily strict rules, but these are the rules that I've noticed a lot of fashion illustrators or a lot of fashion designers who want to sketch out their designs first use. So here I've already divided my paper into different lengths. However big or long you decide the head of your fashion figure is going to be, the width has to be 3/4 of that measurement. So just to keep things simple, I'm going to do a 1-inch tall, 3/4 inch width today. I've already divided it into 10, and as you can see, I've labeled where most of these things are going to go. So I labeled each figurehead with a number 1, 2, 3, all the way up to 10. So in the length of figurehead 1, we're going to have the actual figurehead. At 1.5, we're going to have the shoulder of our figurehead. At 2 is where our bust is going to be. Down to 3 is where our waist and our elbows are going to be. Now this is if your hands are straight down, not if they're necessarily raised up, obviously. At figurehead 4, we are going to have the hips, and at 4.5 is where we're going to have the crotch of this illustration. From 4.5 all the way to 7 is where we have our thighs, because at 7 is where we are going to put the knees. Then at 9 we got the ankles, and from 9 to 10 is where the actual whole foot is going to be. Now I know that seems like it's going to be a big foot, but you have to remember that a lot of these illustrations are actually drawn to have high heels. So it's not really that their feet are that big, it's just that they're kind of elongated with the heel. Okay, so now we've got all these lines for the measurements. Another line that we have to make is this straight up and down line right here. This is called the balance line. Now, no matter what the position that your figure is going to be in, we have to have this balance line. Every person has a balance. If too much of your weight kind of goes on one side or the other of this balance line, then you're going to tip over. And in order to keep these figures somewhat realistic, I know they're going to be super long and super skinny, whatever, but somewhat realistic, we have to have this balance line. Now this balance line usually will go through the middle of the throat, and we want to make sure that we have at least one or part of one of each foot on each side of this line. So that way we know that if there was a person doing whatever pose we're drawing, then they wouldn't be on the floor because they lost balance. Okay, so now that we've got that, we're gonna get our ruler, and we are going to start with the head. Now, as I said, the length I have here is 1 inch, which means that the width of the head has to be 3/4 of an inch. That means that I have to make sure I have 3/8 of an inch on each side Okay, so now this box is going to represent where our head has to fit into. Now, another rule that is typically followed but not necessarily super important is that our waist is usually the same width as the head. So when I already told you guys that the waist is going to be at the line, the third line. So I'm gonna go there and I'm going to make the exact same measurement. And yes, I realize that that is a very small waist. We've used the width of the head to come up with the waist. We also have to use it for the bust and for the hips. Now, some people do 1.5 times the width, some people do 2. I'm just gonna do 2. That means that on both the hip and at the bust, we are going to measure 3/4 of an inch on each side, 1.5 inches all together. And this is going to give us that nice hourglass shape that everyone wants in their models. So now that we've got that, we're going to connect those lines. They don't have to be perfect. Right now we're kind of just drawing out the basic outline. And once we have that, we will fill it out a lot better. Okay, so here we have, this is the measurements of our head. Here's our bust, waist, and hips. Now from this, a lot of it is going to be just what we feel works and what we feel doesn't work. Let's do our shoulders next. Now, from the bust, we're just gonna go straight up just to have sort of like a boxy look right here. And then from there, we're gonna move up and create a nice neck. I don't really have a measurement that I use for the neck, as long as it looks like it would actually fit with that specific head size. You don't want to have like a really big head and a really thin neck, or vice versa. Next, let's move on to arms. So the shoulder is going to be up here, so we're just going to draw a circle of where our shoulder is, and then our elbow is going to be down here at line 3. So we're going to do the same thing. We're going to draw a circle, then we're going to connect them. So before we draw in any details into our fashion figure, it's going to look like one of those like wooden model like reference puppets that everyone uses when they draw. It's going to be very similar to that. So now that we have our elbows, I forgot to mention that we're going to have our wrists be at the same level as the crotch. So we're going to come down here to 4.5 and draw a small circle. That's going to be our wrists. And then we're going to do the same thing that we did with our elbows and shoulders. We're going to connect them. Okay, so we got those. Now for the hands, we can just draw somewhat of a triangular figure. Again, there is no specific measurement for this one. It's kind of just whatever feels right. Okay, so now we got the crotch right here. We're just going to draw a line right there. And now we're going to do the knees. So we're gonna come down here to line 7, and kind of like how we did with the elbows and the shoulders, we're gonna draw circles. Connect from the hips to the knees. You wanna make sure that the knees and the thighs look proportionate to the rest of the body. So now that we've got the knees done, we're gonna go down to the ankles, and we're gonna draw circles there. And then we are going to connect them. Now that we're here at the ankle, we're going to draw the feet as if they were in high heels. So it's kind of like how we do the hands. They're somewhat of a triangle. You can draw one facing forward, you can draw them facing to the side. So here we have pretty much the outline of our 10-head fashion figure drawn. And I'm gonna go back up here to the head, and we're gonna actually draw the shape of the head. Now we're going to use these connection lines and these circles and create the actual fashion figure. So this is where we use our contour lines to try and make them as smooth as possible. Now, like most artists, I hate drawing hands because they are, I mean, they're not hard, they're just frustrating. So a lot of times I just draw my girls to have fists like that, or I'll just make them really artistic looking with long, slender fingers, and I'll make their fingers kind of do that little fancy thing right there. You're welcome to do either one. I'm going to do the fancy hands just because I think it looks a little bit nicer. Because let's face it, if you spend all this time trying to make this girl look nice and fashionable and fancy, you should probably spend a little extra time on the hands. Now, you can go in with your eraser and erase all those lines underneath that we have for like the circles, the connection lines. Clean it up a little bit. Now that we've cleaned it up, now that we've gotten rid of all those lines underneath, you'll see that some of your lines aren't super great. As you can see, my shoulders aren't necessarily identical. But now that you have the majority of the outline, you can actually use that to fix all those mistakes. This is where we go in and kind of add all those little detailings, like the collarbones, all those muscles that you would see underneath. If your girl is gonna be wearing like something that shows off her midriff, you might wanna draw like her belly button, maybe some muscle definition. Same thing up here, you could draw like biceps. You could draw like the muscles on her calves and her thighs, that kind of stuff. And now we're gonna move on to the face. Now the face, kind of like the rest of the body, does have some measurements that I try to follow, but they do help with making your face somewhat symmetrical, especially if you're not very good at doing freehand. So the face itself is 1 inch in length. So I'm gonna find the halfway point, the 1/2 inch length, and we're gonna draw a line very lightly over it. That's where our eyes are going to be. Then we're gonna do 1/4 of an inch. That is where our lips is going to be. And if we find the halfway point between those two, that is where our nose is going to be. Or not necessarily going to be right there, but that is where your nose should kind of be. So now this is where we're gonna draw the eyes. You can make them realistic, you can make them artistic. I usually kind of just draw like a lash line like that, and then just kind of fill it in like it's some sort of fancy eye. Some people do like the full eye with the pupil. Lips, I usually just kind of draw some sort of line like that. And then for the nose, I kind of just detail, nothing super important, because if you're using this as a way to design your clothes, the focus shouldn't be on the face, it should be on the garment itself. Now for the hair, if you want her to be a bald bitch, we're going to find halfway from the eye line to the top of the head, which should be about 1/4 of an inch because the eyes are at 1/2 an inch. And that is where, or somewhere around there, is where your hairline should start. Now, one style of hair that always works when it comes to fashion illustration is the heavy bangs. So I always just do bangs. Make sure you go a little bit over the top of the head and the side of the head, and then just add the hair. You can make it flowy. You can make it go straight down. You can make it wavy. It's really up to you, whatever you're trying to design. I'm just gonna leave her with long, straight hair. I'm gonna erase this other one. I'm gonna erase this eye and make her have even eyes. Just lots of lashes, lots of eyeliner. There we have her. Then again, you can also add in ears in general, the ear should go from the top of the eye to the bottom of the nose. And then if you don't want it to look like an alien, you can add in some eyebrows. Whatever eyebrow you add, it's up to you. She kind of looks like Xena. Okay, so here we have our illustration template, or as we call it in school, is a croquis. Now, what I would usually do here is I would outline the whole thing with a pen so that it's more permanent. And then every time I have to do a sketch, I would just take my paper, put it right on top of this, trace it out, and then I would draw the clothing that I was going to design on top of that. This way, this is something that you can keep portfolio and just use over and over and over. You can draw them in different poses. You can draw them from like a 3/4 profile. You can draw them running, whatever. So next week I'm gonna go back to working on the patterns that we created. But when I'm done with that series, I am gonna come back to this and I'm gonna show you guys how to do a plus size illustration. I'm gonna show you guys how to do a male body illustration. And if you guys are interested, we could even do one for children. If you are, let me know in the comments. If you're not, let me know in the comments too. If you like today's video, make sure that you like, comment, share, subscribe, and ring the bell. You can also follow me on Instagram on @apollylook. There I post some of my current work and any upcoming videos that I will be posting on here. If you didn't like the video, I'm going to assume that you didn't like it because you can't draw, and that's not my fault. That's your parents' fault for making an unartistic child. Okay, bye.